Think you've seen everything in 2025? Think again. Williams is at the center of a controversy that might seem technical on the surface, but in reality exposes a major flaw in the FIA's inspection system. The team failed to deliver crucial footage of its rear wing, and that raises a fundamental question. How much can teams really hide if they want to? In this video, we're breaking down exactly what happened, why it matters so much, and what could change going forward. Drop a like, subscribe to Paddock Insider, and tell us in the comments. Was this carelessness or strategy? At first glance, the incident might seem technical, almost trivial. Williams failed to submit footage from the onboard camera positioned on the car's rear wing within the FIA's required timeframe after FP1 in Shanghai. According to the report filed by technical delegate Joe Bauer, this constitutes a procedural violation. But in Formula One, nothing is ever just a simple oversight. We're talking about a sport where every thousandth of a second is measured, where data is monitored in real time, and where each team has entire departments dedicated to compliance and precision. Williams is no rookie. They know the rules, the deadlines, and the stakes. So when they fail to deliver mandatory footage, especially at a time when the FIA is openly tightening its grip on aerodynamic flex tests, it's not something that can be brushed off. To the casual fan, it might sound like the FIA being overzealous. But for those who follow modern F1 closely, this slip-up smells like something more. The real question, what was in that footage that couldn't be sent? Or rather, what wasn't? And what could that have stopped from being discovered? The FIA demands this kind of material because it knows some teams operate in the gray areas of the regulations, particularly regarding aeroelasticity. Rear wings that flex at high speed in a controlled way can offer a huge aerodynamic advantage without technically breaching static load tests. It's the sort of creative engineering that fascinates some fans and frustrates others. Here's where the FIA has been fighting a quiet war behind the scenes. The idea that the technical rulebook alone isn't enough if the systems that enforce it can be bypassed. The obligation to submit footage on time is part of a wider monitoring effort. It's not just about the footage. It's about what it represents, a surveillance system that makes it harder for teams to operate in the shadows. The fact that Williams offered no immediate explanation, not even a short statement, only makes things murkier. Internal miscommunication, technical error, access issues, all of these would be understandable if clearly explained. But radio silence doesn't help their case, and the timing couldn't be worse. The FIA is particularly sensitive around rear wing flexibility after internal footage from Australia raised eyebrows. Tighter tests were already expected, and now they feel inevitable. If Williams is perceived as the weak link in the system, it won't just face scrutiny itself. It could escalate the tension between teams and the governing body to a whole new level. For fans, this saga is a reminder of just how intense the off-track battles can be. When something as minor as a video file becomes a regulatory flashpoint, it shows how razor-sharp the competition really is. And in a grid as tight as 2025, any hidden technical edge could be the difference maker. Who's to say this error wasn't part of something bigger? And if it was, could other teams be doing the same? If you think this is just another bureaucratic squabble, be careful. This is how massive scandals start. Just ask anyone who remembers Spygate in 2007 or the team orders controversies of the 2000s. The difference now? It all revolves around data and the trust that teams are playing fair behind the scenes. And that trust, right now, it's hanging by a thread. If you've followed Formula One for a while, you'll know that the issue of wing flexibility is a classic engineering conundrum, and arguably the most famous gray area in the sports rulebook. The key term here is aeroelasticity, the natural phenomenon in which aerodynamic components deform under air pressure. It happens on every car, and always has. The question isn't whether it happens, but rather, how much of that deformation is intentionally designed to give an advantage, and at what point does it become illegal? Ever since the 1980s, when Gordon Murray designed Brabham cars that passed the FIA's static tests but behaved completely differently on track, Formula One has been locked in a never-ending tug-of-war between inventive engineers and suspicious regulators. The rule says, The wing must not move under load, but the reality is, let's make it move in a way that doesn't look like it's moving. And that's where the most notorious gray zone in F1 begins. This is precisely why the FIA finally decided to act. Since the 2023 Belgian Grand Prix, high-definition cameras have been mounted on the front and rear wings of cars. The aim? To measure, visually and scientifically, just how much these elements flex under real-world aerodynamic loads during running. Reference dots were even added to end plates, so FIA officials could detect even the slightest rotation of the wing elements. Sounds like the perfect solution, right? But there's a catch. It all depends on the teams playing along. If a team like Williams can simply delay the submission of those videos and face no real consequences, then what's the point of the system? Think of it like this. In a police investigation, if a company refuses to hand over CCTV footage within the required time, suspicions naturally arise. Of course they do, and that's exactly what's at stake here. The credibility of the FIA's oversight method. What's most frustrating for fans is that this exposes a central dilemma in modern F1. The technology evolves, the monitoring tools get sharper, but the loopholes never disappear. Why? Because the regulations are often reactive, and the teams are always 3 steps ahead. It's like playing chess against an opponent who can change the rules mid-game, and the FIA is constantly trying to catch up without losing control. And let's be clear, wing flexibility isn't just a minor technical quirk. It can completely alter the behavior of a car. On straights, a rear wing that gives way under pressure reduces drag and increases top speed. In corners, it resets to create downforce. It's essentially an invisible DRS, and it's worth tenths per lap. Now imagine this. If the FIA can't guarantee that all teams are submitting footage on time, that opens the door for others to do the same. This is no longer just about Williams. It's an open invitation for the gray area to remain alive and well in the midfield and beyond. Here's a personal take. Perhaps it's time the FIA stops relying so heavily on the team's good faith and starts enforcing this process with real teeth. If technical fairness is the aim, the monitoring needs proper enforcement. It's not enough to issue warnings. There must be penalties, and penalties that hurt, whether in points, reputation, or budget. For fans, this whole saga is deeply compelling. After all, it's part of what makes F1 so gripping. The constant game of cat and mouse between regulators and engineers. But if you're a supporter of a team that plays by the book, seeing rivals exploit loopholes without consequences is infuriating. Worse still, it shatters the illusion that championships are won purely on track. The hard truth is this: unless the FIA transforms this technical surveillance system into a genuinely mandatory framework with automatic sanctions for non-compliance, wing flexibility will remain Formula One's most exploited and least policed gray area. And whoever masters the art of bending the rules without getting caught could carry that advantage all the way to the final checkered flag of the season. Williams isn't being accused of running an illegal wing. What's under investigation is a procedural breach. And that's where it gets tricky. Because if the FIA fails to take action or downplays the matter, it risks setting a dangerous precedent. Picture this. Other teams, seeing the lack of consequences, might start doing the same. In other words, they could delay or withhold sensitive footage to avoid detection of borderline components. In a grid as tight as 2025's, a loophole like that could reshape the entire championship. The FIA must respond decisively. Even if Williams has a reasonable excuse, the rule is clear. And in F1, rules are everything. This camera-based monitoring system was introduced by the FIA at the 2023 Belgian Grand Prix after suspicions emerged about excessive rear-wing flex. Since then, enforcement has increased, but only during free practice sessions. Why? Because during the key moments, qualifying and the race, teams are still not required to submit this footage. That's a massive loophole. A team could run a more flexible wing when it counts, and bolt on a legal version just for FP1. That's exactly the kind of suspicion raised during FP1 in Australia, when internal onboard footage from several cars triggered the FIA to tighten its testing regime. Williams may have simply made a procedural mistake, but what if it wasn't? Williams's hearing with the stewards was postponed until Saturday. That suggests the FIA doesn't see it as urgent, but knows it can't ignore it either. If Williams escapes without penalty, other teams will begin testing the limits. Here lies the dilemma. How do you punish something that didn't break a technical regulation but clearly undermines oversight? The response will have to be symbolic. The FIA must make it clear that omissions, even seemingly innocent ones, won't be tolerated. That might mean a fine, a formal warning, or even a symbolic exclusion from a session. If nothing is done, the concept of continuous monitoring, which is vital to the championship's integrity, collapses. This entire saga is a reminder that Formula One isn't just about drivers and overtakes. It's about engineers, regulations, and those tiny loopholes that can explode into major scandals. Williams might be the example here, but the message is bigger. No one is above scrutiny. And if you think this doesn't affect the championship, think again. A flexing wing can be worth tenths per lap. And in 2025, tenths mean positions, maybe even titles. If you want to stay locked in on F1's deeper layers, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Paddock Insider. We don't just cover what's happening on track. We unpack what the cameras and teams are trying to hide. Because F1, my friend, is war on every level.